In fact, let's take you back to this briefing. Presidential spokesperson Vincent Magwenya is briefing the media on the president's public program for the week.
And they have discussed a way to bring some additional megawatts onto the grid. What does Cabinet and the Presidency feel about this? Thank you.
Okay, so let me start with your last question. You'll recall that it was always part of the Energy Action Plan to look at the importation of additional megawatts from neighboring countries. And so what the minister is doing is in the furtherance of that element of the plan as we seek to add more megawatts into the national grid, but also as we seek to reduce the severity of load shedding at this stage. So it's consistent with the provisions of the Energy Action Plan, and the President is quite delighted that we're getting progress in that regard. With regards to talk about the BRICS Summit, moving to China, we've seen similar media reports. We have not been behind those media reports as the Presidency. Should there be any change with respect to the hosting of the summit, the President will communicate that. As things stand, South Africa will be hosting and chairing the upcoming BRICS Summit. Tembile.
Thank you, Vincent. My name is Tembile with Bloomberg News. Just on Heidi's question, so are you denying that there's been any conversation with South Africa's counterparts in China about moving the summit to that country? And hypothetically speaking, since the decision has not been taken, how would the modalities work given that South Africa is the chair of BRICS this year? Then secondly, the Deputy President says that there's been engagements with the ICC. Are you able to share what it is that South Africa has asked of that organization related to the arrest warrant on the Russian president? And then linked to that, last week the minister in the Presidency, Minister Chaveni, said that there is a possibility that peace talks could be held in South Africa. And that would mean that President Zelensky and Putin would come to South Africa. Could you just explain how we would host the president of Russia, given the arrest warrant? And is that part of the engagements with the ICC to say, can you maybe have a waiver for us so that he can come here for that peace initiative or peace talks? Thank you.
So the danger with the questions is they reference two of my principles, and I've not had the benefit of directly seeing those comments that you attribute to them. So I'm not going to be that helpful on both those issues until I'm fully briefed and I have the necessary background. I can't respond on any hypothetical question. I can only respond on a decision that the President and the government will have made and be able to further provide guidance or unpack that decision. What I can give you as an assurance, which the President has done, is that first and foremost, the executive is responsible for the management and the execution of our foreign policy, and it does so within the prescripts of our Constitution and in full adherence of our laws. And so you, Tembile, and the rest of the country can take assurance that at no point in time will the President and his administration lead a process that will be in any form in violation of our laws. I'm not going to comment on your question regarding the ICC and the comments made by the Deputy President until I've satisfied myself of the context of those comments.
Including the question on whether or not there has been a conversation with the Chinese government. You cannot confirm or deny that.
There was a call last week, Friday, between President Ramaphosa and President Xi Jinping, and that call was in regard to the upcoming or the imminent, rather, peace mission that is led by African heads of state. President Ramaphosa was briefing his counterpart. You will recall that China has produced a peace plan with respect to the resolution of the conflict in Ukraine. The President is in support of all initiatives that are aimed at a peaceful resolution of that conflict, including the China initiative. The call further discussed the upcoming BRICS summit, as well as general cooperation at BRICS, with the two leaders affirming their commitment to a successful BRICS summit. I see you still monopolizing the mic, which Tando and Quinnen are desperately trying to get hold of. Okay, there's a question behind you. Yes, sir.
A very good afternoon. My name is Tabiso Hoku from Sputnik News International. Mr. Magwenya, I hope the next question is not hypothetical, but it's on the Africa Peace Initiative on Ukraine. I just wanted to find out if you have any details on when will the foreign ministers travel to Moscow and Kyiv, and where will they first start, Moscow or Kyiv, and any details with regards to what will be proposed there. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Tabiso. So, Tabiso, we are anticipating that quite imminently a delegation of African heads of states will head to both Ukraine and Russia. However, due to the sensitivity of the security situation on the ground, particularly in the Ukraine, we are unable to confirm publicly the dates in which the delegation of the African heads of states will travel to both countries. That's something you'll have to just bear with us on. We will most likely confirm on the day that peace talks are taking place, and potentially even confirm once the delegation has left the Ukraine. That's the decision that's been taken. We are aware that some parties have been bending about some dates, but we will not be in a position to confirm those dates publicly as a result of the sensitivities with respect to the security situation. Generally speaking, there is a great deal of commitment from all the heads of states involved to see through this mission. President Ramaphosa has participated in a number of consultations with the participants or the mission participants, as well as consultations with both heads of states that are involved in the conflict, including the UN General Secretary, as well as I've mentioned earlier on, heads of states that are members of BRICS. So this weekend there was a call with Prime Minister Modi of India. There was some weeks ago there was a call with President Lula of Brazil, and so there have been a number of consultations with regard to this peace mission, with the aim, obviously, of getting some kind of support to the mission, but also alignment. As I've said, there are a number of other initiatives, and it will be good to have, or it is good to have, some form of alignment across those initiatives. Next question. Are there questions from online, Sakane? Yeah.
Yes, we've got a question from Ntlantla Khatlani from the SABC. He asks, what do you say to claims that South Africa's position on the Ukraine-Russia war is because South Africa is afraid of sanctions, but also to be cautious not to spoil the relations with Russia? And then there's another question from Zama Lutuli of AFP. Ahead of the new global financing pact in Paris, could the presidency comment on how South Africa believes the international aid system should be reformed to better serve countries in the global south, particularly at a time where much of Western nations' funding attention is directed towards the Ukraine?
Okay. Right. So let me start with Ntlantla. First of all, we're a little bit surprised at this talk of sanctions, which quite honestly we regard as reckless and as very damaging to our already ailing and struggling economy. We find this talk of sanctions as being purely alarmist, and we find it to be quite undermining to South Africa's sovereignty, secondly to the stability of our economy. There is no evidence whatsoever to point to any emergence of sanctions from any country or even from the United Nations Security Council, which is the only authority to institute global sanctions, if you like. There's no such talk. We've had, as a government, several bilateral discussions with the US government, and there's been no suggestion that the US will consider applying sanctions to South Africa. So it's difficult to respond to a question that says we are afraid of sanctions, because we don't have a line of sight as to where exactly those sanctions will be coming from, what will inform those sanctions, and what will be the purpose those sanctions will serve. South Africa has taken a non-aligned stance on the conflict in Ukraine. South Africa has not participated in arming any of the parties that are involved in that conflict. On the contrary, South Africa has taken upon itself to mobilize support and to mobilize engagement that will result to a peaceful resolution to this conflict. South Africa from the onset has been quite consistent to call for peace and to call for the parties involved in the conflict to sit down in the negotiations table. President Ramaphosa has repeatedly stated that there is no conflict that will end with a winner or a loser, particularly with this one, and that only a peaceful negotiation and resolution to this conflict will see peace in that region. And so it's kind of difficult to continue entertaining speculation around sanctions, which, as I've said before, we find to be rather reckless, and we find to be very undermining to efforts that are currently underway to build or rebuild our economy, which, as you all know, is under massive strain and pressure at the moment. Zama, well, repeatedly, South Africa is called, and President Ramaphosa has been quite consistent in this call for the reform of these institutions in the manner that recognizes the varying dynamics that developing countries find themselves under. The president has called for a view that also appreciates that, for example, with respect to climate change financing, how we transition to a completely decarbonized economy is something that will need to happen at a pace that we can manage, as that we can afford. And so for the president, really the bottom line is that we need an environment or a regime that guides how developmental financial institutions operate, that is very much informed by the